Hey IT friends, how's it going? Saw a post on Reddit the other day that I really couldn't get out of my head because it reminds me of a challenge that I think a lot of us have that we just don't really talk about that much. And so I want to give kudos to the poster who posted this. The premise was basically, am I expecting too much from my techs in terms of certifications and growth? And he went on to post um, the standard thing that we've come to expect at a decent company. He provides opportunities for professional development, provides immediate compensations for earning certifications, pretty hefty bonuses actually for doing so, gives them some time to study, and generally stresses the importance of why they want to upskill both to work for him but in their careers. And then he's saying in the second half of his post, but like none of my team ever take advantage of this. And most of my team, while they're very good at what they do, are basically stagnant in that role. Am I doing something wrong? Are my expectations in the wrong place? And I think that's a challenge that a lot of people face in a lot of industries. And the answer is a little bit complex and complicated. But if you don't want to listen to the whole video, then no, you're not expecting too much from all your techs. You're just expecting the wrong things from most of them. And that's all right. So we had talked about in a previous video the Jun Krueger effect, and I didn't feel like retracing and rebuilding the graph, so I stole this from a Google search. But it'll work, and it helps explain some of what's happening here. So uh, there's a book called Top Grading, which you should totally go read. But the premise of this is that you have a sample size of a population, in this case of employees. There's going to be a finite number of those employees who are your A players. Um, they're your rock stars. They're just amazing, and they have this unquenchable drive to just move forward, be the best. And if you have a couple of those on your team, that's fantastic. But you don't have an entire team full of rock stars. It's statistically improbable. And we can see that anywhere. I mean, a sports team isn't made of only the best players ever. And when you do that, when you make a Pro Bowl or an All Star team, it's usually laughably terrible because then not everybody's an All Star if everybody's an All Star. So, with that same idea, the bulk of your team is not going to be an A player. But put any A players to the side for a minute because the challenge and really what the OP was talking about in his post is your B and C players. So when you're learning something, and this chart is really helpful, and so the x-axis here of experience is really over time, and then the confidence axis is also over time. The challenge is when you get these folks, especially when you get these L1s that are relatively new to the industry, they're coming into the space where they don't know what they don't know. They're over here on this part of the Dunning-Kruger curve, or what I call they're to the left of Mount Stupid. And that right there, that's Mount Stupid. And they're over here. And so the thing with that is initially to learn the very basics of how to be somewhat competent in something. This is really quick. Like this is a really quick journey to initially get acceptably competent at something. And I used an example in a previous video of riding a bicycle. It is not particularly hard to initially learn how to sit on and balance on the bicycle. Once you figure it out, that's pretty easy. And a lot of the intro tech skills and basic stuff at your MSP are like that. And that can cause them very early on. And we tend to see this right in the first like 1 to 3 months. They're very enthusiastic. They have these big dreams. I want to work in security. I want to be a network admin. I want to be a data center guy. And you sit there, you're like, okay, little one, we'll see. Eventually, the non-toxic employees get to the top of Mount Stupid, and then they see this entire pit of despair. This is the pit of despair. I'm sorry, I suck at drawing. The pit of despair where you realize, holy crap, I don't know anything. And whether they're in the pit of despair or they've simply just crested Mount Stupid and they're starting to realize that all this time and knowledge exists, what that ends up doing for your toxic employees are just going to live at the top of this mountain forever, and you don't want them. So your non-toxic employees will eventually realize, oh wow, there's a lot to this. That's where you're finding the employees that are not taking advantage of your certification based PD programs. Because your A team, they're seeing this and they're like, okay, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. But everybody else who isn't on the A team, the B team, and most companies are made up mostly of the B team and the C team members, they're looking at this and they're like, wow, that's that's a lot of work. Your C team members look at this and they go, the hell with this, and they leave and they go do something else. You know, they go to internal IT, they go over to our sysadmin, they get a job at Geek Squad, whatever, but they leave. And then your B team players, they're the ones that say, well, I'm going to keep moving forward and learning, but all of this, that's going to take a long time. And they see that over here, that's where the L2s and L3s are starting to get. And they're like, wow, man, that's a lot of work. So now that we're back out of PowerPoint mode, that kind of brings in the other piece of this. A lot of the businesses that tend to have this challenge of like, why isn't my team taking advantage of and approaching professional development the way I would, which is really what is being said here, whether you mean to say it or not. It gets into that entrepreneurial business owner, upper level management paradox. Most of the people who are going to start a business, be an entrepreneur, or be in upper management as a desired career goal and not just something they tripped over backwards into, generally have a certain level of motivation on a DISC profile that's probably a certain level of D that pushes them forward to be motivated and passionate in the face of objectively not being qualified to be motivated and passionate. And I say this all the time to my coaching clients that no one is going to love your baby as much as you do. And that kind of applies here a little bit. These are employees. If they wanted to be business owners or start a business, they would do that. And if they had wanted to go to college and get a degree, they would have done that. And if they did do that, they're probably at this point realizing that that was, for most career choices, especially this one, a mistake. So you've got a body of people who are just not going to have the same passion and drive as you would to spend their own time figuring out how to get a degree. And that's really important. And some of you are going to say, I provide time at work for them to study towards it. And that's awesome. And I love that you do that. And more of you should do that. And it really should be dedicated time they're able to focus on PD. And every good company I've ever worked for that has had a decent culture has had some aspect of doing that. However, getting a certification, even a relatively like low barrier certification like A plus, M plus, or S plus, that's a lot of work. Like it's a lot of work. And a lot of folks are not good test takers. And we tend to apply the bias of, well, I bootstrapped myself and got through that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Why can't you? To forget that, well, because they're not me. And they don't process information the way I am. And they don't think the way I do. And they don't have the same motivations as me. So a lot of your staff, they crest that Mount Stupid. They look down into that valley and they realize, wow, all right, I understand now why the owner's saying I need to learn and level up. I don't know if I have it in me to do it. And that's where you see those people who are just perpetually studying for the exam and they don't go and they get it. And there's a whole bunch of other reasons. A lot of people are afraid of test taking. A lot of people have low confidence issues, imposter syndrome. But all of that together, like it's just a lot. And so that's likely why your staff isn't just tripping over themselves to take advantage of your probably incredibly generous certification program at your MSP. What do you do about it? I don't think you should stop offering those programs because, as we said, first of all, any company eventually is going to have a small number of A players, and those A players are going to take advantage of these programs, and you're going to be happy that they did. And a small percentage of your B players will get there eventually. You might have to prod them a little bit. A lot of this is going to be about a regular meeting cadence, keeping them on track with their career objectives, and just basically not assuming that they understand that the steps needed to get to their goal, because that's a frequent problem we have with business executives. I do it all the time. I suffer from this. I will state a high level business objective to somebody that has no skin in the game and no context, assume they'll figure out all the steps 1 through 7 to arrive at that goal and why. And then I come back a month later and they have not. And I am like, wait, what? Good news for all of you and Dean. Your employees are likely like that. So regular meetings where you're helping them understand that progress on these things helps them towards their own personal goals and their own personal brand are very helpful. But all of that aside, I think the other thing you really want to focus on is another element of just general employee culture that often gets overlooked, especially in the small business. Because in the small business, we expect everyone who works for us is going to be passionate about our brand. We see that also at the large corporate level as well, where you want everybody to be passionate about your brand, and for different reasons. In both cases, it is accidentally and sometimes intentionally used to overlook some fairly valid concerns that just general employee culture have. So let's talk about that for a second. A lot of our employees are going to fall into one of two major buckets, especially at our MSPs. They're either new to the industry and this is their first real job. And when I say real job, I mean like their first full-time job with benefits, working for a single company with the idea of building a career out of it. Or where their second or third in industry job. So they've already gone to another MSP or IT department or vendor, something related, and they're sort of still at the beginning of their career, but we're not their first rodeo in the space. In either category, with these folks that are relatively new to their career, I think it's important to understand the employment culture they've come from and how that might affect their decision making. So in the case where this is somebody's first real career job, which I think is the more common one, you got to remember that up until this point, the average job that a functioning human has had previously really rewarded time served. So I don't necessarily just mean like part-time jobs or very low barrier full-time jobs, maybe like retail or food service, just any job they've had up until this point that was more transactional, that was a job versus a career, likely had a culture that rewarded time served, because that is a challenge with transactional jobs like that. Folks come, they work for a little while and they leave. So employees that stick around make life easier for everybody, and we tend to reward that. And so if you're coming from that's been your only exposure to the working world, where the amount of time I've been here, and we can take it a step further and say the amount of effort I've put in directly correlates to my paycheck and potentially title and position of authority. Well, that's not how most of us work in the like highly skilled career based world. I don't care how long you've been doing this, that's just a component. If you've been doing this for me for 6 months or 6 years, that's an element. I appreciate that, but 6 years of resetting passwords doesn't necessarily make you more valuable to me than 6 months of resetting passwords. So there's that logic that we know as managers and owners that a lot of the staff we're hiring, that's not the culture they've come from. And then the folks that have come from other MSPs, well, you got to remember that like one of the reasons why they're probably moving around is they didn't like where they were. So there can be Alex at OIT does this wonderful thing of past work life trauma, where she'll go in early on when they've hired somebody and kind of figure out like, where does your employment bias currently sit? What happened to you before, like good or bad, so you know how to overcome those things. A lot of us don't do that. And so you have employees coming in who have a previous employment culture that they're absolutely projecting onto you. And most of these employees, especially your B players, they put in a lot of effort. I mean, B players are who run our companies. They're the fuel that drives our business, and they put in a lot of time. They put in a lot of effort, and they tend to look at that and say, "Where's my reward?" Whereas we tend to look at that and say, "I don't care that you've been here for a year. Why didn't you get the A plus and the M plus I asked you to get, and I offered free money for it? What the hell?" And there's that mismatch. So what we started to do at my last MSP, and what I've slowly started to see more and more companies, especially in the tech space, starting to introduce, are two sort of parallel tracks that allow you to move forward. And then they also enable you to, as an employee, have an axis of XY axes of sort of employment greatness, where you can move up both vertically but also laterally. And it solves a number of the pain points we just talked about, because ultimately, getting back to that example, that password reset example, you know what, somebody who's been resetting passwords for me for 6 years, if they're good at it and I've kept them there for that long and I'm happy they're doing it, even though they haven't learned other things, I do want to reward them for that time served. I do want to reward that loyalty. I don't want to reward it with a title, and I don't want to reward it with a positional or vertical pay increase, but I might want to reward it with lateral pay increases. And a lot of us don't provide that framework at our MSP. In the same vein, if I have somebody who's been resetting passwords for 6 months and then they say, "Hey, we could automate this," they go find a tool, they automate it, they get it all working for me, save me a ton of money, and are hyper efficient. Well, I like that. I'm probably going to promote that person. So that person's going to have the room to grow vertically. And so you reward both behaviors. And then when you have an employee that does both, well, it's like steps, which we see in a lot of union-based industries where there are pay steps. There are vertical major jumps that come with major milestones, and then there are lateral jumps that the employee has quite a degree of control over. And so you combine those things at your MSP, and you have two parallel ways to, besides like KPIs and performance metrics and bonuses, you have two primary ways to increase somebody's salary. You do what the original poster is doing here. You reward for professional development and education and certifications. But then on the separate side, you should come up with a system, and we can look to our friends that are in the trades, that rewards experience and tasks that they've demonstrated they can complete. And if you provide both of those opportunities to somebody, if you basically put together an advancement book, you figure, if I'm an apprentice electrician, I need to fill out basically an advancement book that a certified electrician signs off that, yeah, I've done these things, because I need to be able to show that, and I need to pass a test to get my license. And it's kind of the same idea here, where if you give your employees two paths, vertical and lateral, where you allow them to demonstrate either academically or through experience and time served that they can get things done for you, and therefore can increase their pay scale, you help solve a lot of these challenges. And you'll still end up with employees who are going through professional development, who can be proud of their increases at work, but it's a little bit more tied to and grounded in reality. And the other thing it'll do is it'll help you avoid handing out titles, because there's two things you can't take back. You can't take back money, and you can't take back a title. And a lot of us tend to hand out titles as a form of soft compensation. We'll say, "Hey, you manage all our backups, so you're the proactive manager." Are they? Well, fine. I'm looking online and it says that proactive team managers get paid 20K more than me. Where's my 20K? What do you mean I don't have the experience to earn that 20K? Why'd you make me a manager? You don't want to do that. So if instead they have a lateral path where, listen, you have not met the minimum requirements to move up to be the proactive team manager, although you are de facto performing that role, I'm not going to give you the title and the pay increase that comes with it, because you haven't met the requirements. I need this cert, this cert, this cert, and these things. However, you have been doing it competently and effectively for the last year, so laterally, I'm going to increase your pay for doing it because you've demonstrated these skills that are on our lateral progression. And you might say that they're, eventually the most senior on the proactive team. I mean, you might indicate to the rest of the company that they're the authority. People will sort that out amongst themselves, but you haven't handed out a title you can't take back. So I think it's important at the end of the day just to remember that not everybody on your staff is going to be as motivated as your best employees or as you are to go out and spend their own time learning and earning certifications, even if they can get free money. It's one of the main reasons why you'll see most large employment studies do show that while compensation is important, it generally isn't as good of a motivator as we all think it is, because it takes work. So keeping that in the back of your head, and this dovetails into another thing that I saw recently, just as a final wrap up. Just remember, especially if you're still at a company where you are the owner and founder and you're approaching it with this level of passion, and maybe you have like one other person on your team that shares your passion, and the two of you are looking at everyone else and being like, what the hell, everybody? You just got to remember that, like, not your entire identity might be your business. That might be who you are. That might be your personality. It probably isn't for your employees, and most of them aren't going to think that way because they're just not going to, and that's fine. But if the only method outside of, you know annual cost of living increase or like KPI or metric based compensation for them to earn more is to approach their job with the same level of hustle that you, the founder of the company, approach it with, that's probably why your strategy isn't landing well, because just most of them aren't going to do that. So think critically about what you're doing for compensating your employees. You're a fantastic boss for offering the methods, even if they're not taking advantage of them. And back to OP here and his initial question of, is he expecting too much? You're not expecting too much. You're definitely not expecting too much. You're just expecting everyone to think the same way as you, which they're not all going to do. Have a great day. Keep compensating your team. Don't stop learning.